Um, on behalf of the Seeds for Jubilee Foundation, sponsor of all of our Journey Conference Moving Toward Wholeness events, I extend to you a very heartfelt welcome to this special symposium focusing on our relation to our planet Earth. And I'm happy, as I said, that each of you were able to take part. Personally, I'm looking forward to what Dr. Dennis Merritt and Dr. Tayria Ward have to share with us, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them prior to their presentation. Beginning by saying to Dennis, who will be the second person to speak today, that we're looking forward to your presentation later in the program, and that we're excited to hear all that you have to share with us. And Tayria, we're looking forward to what you're going to share with us too, and I'd like to tell our audience about you. Dr. Tayria Ward is a depth psychologist living in Asheville, North Carolina. And for 30 years, Tayria lived in Los Angeles, where she raised her family and worked for 2 decades as a minister, and then a professor teaching both at the graduate and undergraduate levels. Nearly 20 years ago, she founded Bridging Worlds Mountain Retreat Center in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, which is one of the older sets of mountains in the United States. And there she followed the deepest intuitions of her own heart that put her on a mission to help us recover our appreciation of the wisdom of nature itself and of the ancient world. Dreams have long played a valued role in Tayria's life, and on that mission a few years ago, along with a colleague, she began conducting a monthly global dream symposium, bringing together dreamer participants from all over the world. Some of you have participated, I'm confident, in Tayria's work with that. During her sharing, if you think of questions or comments that may be important to all of us, you can begin chatting them to Mike, as he mentioned, for our discussion later. So with no further ado, I give you Dr. Tayria Ward. And
mute myself. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for that. That was spontaneous, and I enjoyed hearing your spontaneous introduction. So thank you very much. And just to say, these mountains are the oldest mountains in the world right here, the Appalachian Mountains. So it's a beautiful place where I get to dwell. So welcome to all of you. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm honored to be a part of this today because I feel it's such an important time for us to all come together and reflect, such a critical time for our planet and our species. I imagine that most of us are familiar with Jung's work, and who are familiar with Jung's work have held in our minds his famous quote that the world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of mankind. As we know, dreams were the major messaging tool that Jung valued to discover what is going on with the psyche and how to adjust it. So I am grateful that we are going to be considering what is coming to us in dreams as we hold our hearts together on this day. I listen to dreams most days of my life, and as Tom mentioned, I conduct a monthly global community dream symposium where people from all over the world come to share their dreams. We listen to the collective communal messages in the dreams. We do not mind the dreams for their personal content in this public forum. We encourage all listeners to do their private work with the dreams that they share, as it holds tremendous value for them in their personal life circumstances. But in the symposium context, we listen for the value that the dream offers to the community Like a myth or a poem or a story or a piece of scripture, the dream illuminates what the universal dreaming mind is offering to assist us in our journey. Indigenous people the world over, for millennia and up to this very day, gather early in the morning to listen to the dreams of the community, and with this information and wisdom, they conduct their lives. One might imagine that practice has much to do with why Indigenous persons are so uninclined to disconnect from the earth and would never poison or harm her. The dreams would warn them immediately and they would listen. So for today, we have been given some dreams that we can work with together. 2 of these dreams were generously offered to us by a woman who lives in Minneapolis. Let us listen to this first dream as if it were our own, individually and collectively. What does it have for us right now? I will read the full dream first and then comment on a few of its parts. The dreamer had this dream the first week in January of this year, 2022. She reports, I love this dream. It's giving me the chills already. I am in the upper world where spiritual beings who have lived on earth, other spiritual beings who have not been corporeal, and helping spirits of all sorts dwell. No one is there. Immersed in a beautiful mist with varying hues of peach, edged and shaded in grays, lavenders, and browns, the vastness of the space appears as a lovely watercolor. Although the mist is thick, it is not moist, and it is easy to breathe deeply. Although the comfy temperature and windless space seems limitless, I can't see very far in front of me. I stand in the stillness and the light for quite some time. I am filled with questions. I am wondering about life on Earth. Nothing is what I thought it was going to be. I am questioning human nature. My long-held belief, like Anne Frank, that despite everything, everyone is good at heart, is in question. The belief to look to the heavens and think that all will come out right is in question. Who is humanity? What is at our core? What will happen? What can I do? How can I help? Suddenly, I am surrounded by spirits of all sorts. Collectively, they give me a message. This is what is meant to be. The time is now. Everything is coming to culmination right now. And by everything, the sense I got was not that it was just everything about humanity, but rather all things, animals, mountains, plants, atmosphere, maybe even the cosmos, everything. Then I heard, it is imperative that everyone do everything they can. Now is not the time to sit back and expect it to all come into alignment. Everyone must participate in order to shift the balance. End of dream. So now, if we take this dream as a message given to us as a community, the dream suggests to us that we take a position of perspective from the upper world, the realm of spirit. We are daily and often even nightly in our dreams embroiled in the circumstances, chaos, and challenges of earthly life. The dream reminds us to rise to a different standpoint. It offers to us a vision and a feeling of the atmosphere, the silence, the space, the colors, the thick mist. Breathe it in. The dreamer stands in the silence for quite some time. Let's take a minute just now and stand in this silence and the light in the upper world. Out of this silence, for this dreamer, questions arise. Not specific questions about how to meet the challenges facing her and all of us right now, but deep existential questions of who am I and who are we? Her long-held beliefs are up for review. Is everything ultimately good at heart? Oh, is everyone ultimately good at heart? This question asked in the dream, that the dreamer asked in their dream, impressed me very much as I read it, as it reminds me of an admission that Albert Einstein once made, that his biggest question, and the most important question he feels we can ask ourselves is the universe a friendly place or not? He said, answering this question for ourselves is the most significant decision that we ever make. How we decide to answer it will determine whether we build bridges or build walls. Who is humanity? The dream asks. What is at our core? My sense is that collectively we are being confronted with the need to question and evaluate our most established assumptions, our cherished concepts, our deeply held certainties, and be willing to let them all go if this moment calls for it. I think the dream says it is time to question everything. And if we take the dream as guidance, we are urged to understand the importance now of deep and evocative inquiry. As the dreamer undergoes this inquiry into her beliefs, suddenly she is surrounded by spirits of all sorts. And again, collectively, they give her the message. This is what is meant to be. The time is now. Everything is coming to culmination right now. The dreamer senses this means all things, everything. The time is now. A number of ancient prophecies point to this point in time that we are in right now as the time of a great turning. Astrologers have read it in the stars, and we can read it in our own cells and bones. Somehow it seems that many people sense that something massive is happening at this moment in time, that we are born for this time, and that the changes have irrevocably begun. COVID turned the whole world on its ear overnight. Everyone, everywhere, has had to figure out how to respond. And I believe many of us sense that this is barely a dim hint at the change that is now in motion. The dream says as much explicitly. If we trust the dreaming, and I do, the dream leaves no doubt. Everything is coming to culmination right now. It goes on. It is imperative that everyone do everything that they can. Now is not the time to sit back and expect it to come into alignment. Everyone must participate in order to shift the balance. In case any of us think that we can leave it to others to deal with all of this. This reminds me of a dream that a colleague of mine had. In her dream, humans have had to leave the earth because we have rendered it uninhabitable. Now we are inhabiting colonies and structures that we have built in the air. However, this dreamer sees that in these colonies, everyone is just doing exactly what they have been doing to create the problems in the first place. Not even one bit moved or changed. People are shopping, playing games, drinking, partying. She and a few others are trying to find another way. She looked out across the horizon and saw the full moon rising. It was beautiful. But then everything shook frighteningly, and the moon dropped out of sight. She realized that the Earth was shaking in her orbit. Gradually, the shaking stopped, and the moon came back into view. This dream might be a picture of a possible future. And it also might offer us a reflection of where humanity actually is right now at this moment. In a liminal space, already having set into motion the destruction of Earth systems that can't completely be reversed. And what are we doing? Are we behaving in all the same ways? As the UN report said this week, humanity has a short and rapidly closing window before climate change becomes something that will overwhelm our ability to adapt to it. So what are we doing? I think we all have to really ask ourselves this question. And as the dream says, everyone must participate. The time is now. It is imperative that everyone do everything that they can. Everyone must participate in order to shift the balance. The Earth herself is shuddering. We will each need to search for our most authentic and individual response. One author I admire, Sophie Strand, suggests a strategy that I resonate with. Regarding an effort to develop what she calls ecological literacy, she writes, I think the best way to become ecologically literate is quite simple: to love. Follow your love like the moss on the north side of a tree, like a compass. The being, the ecosystem, the species that sparks your curiosity and softens your heart is a portal to the whole world. You cannot and should not attempt to know everything. I want to encourage something I've been thinking of as ecological intimacy. Befriend and court and woo one single being, one single spot, one type of stone. Put your taproot deep into the soil of something that you can't help but love, and trust that it will bloom and dance and offer its wisdom in return. What you love loves you back. Ecological literacy is just a fancy way of saying love something with your whole body. End of quote. This beautiful idea is a place to start. Our response can begin as simply as this, and then will spread through the network of life and consciousness, like the underground large-scale networks of fungi that communicate with each other, forming a vast invisible intelligence that profoundly alters the condition of the entire planet, feeding all of life. Our simple, intentional efforts to love can affect the whole world and cosmos. Even scientists are discovering that our smallest movements go out to the stars. I am very grateful for the perspective and guidance that these dreams offer to us. Thank you to the dream maker and to these dreamers for sharing their night visions with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tayria, and I echo your gratitude to the dreamers also. These are very big dreams, and of course we're living in a very big time. So I hope it's gotten our attention and maybe enables us, I'm speaking for myself in this moment, to wake up. I want to remind everyone that questions and comments related to either Tayria's presentation or Dennis's can be privately chatted to Mike Bezanson for consideration in the second part of the program. And now I'd like to introduce Dennis Merritt. Dr. Dennis Merritt is an eco-psychologist, Jungian analyst, and author. He earned his Ph.D. in entomology at the University of California, Berkeley, a master's in humanistic psychology at Sonoma State University, and is a Zurich-trained Jungian analyst practicing now for 40 years. He lives in Wisconsin, where his relationship with Native American spirituality and practice has greatly enhanced his deep connection with the land. Dennis, as did Jung, embodies the perspective of the analyst and also the scientist. This was clearly and vividly illustrated by the choice of his topic for his diplomate dissertation at the Jung Institute in Zurich, synchronicity experiments with the I Ching and their relevance to the theory of evolution. His work with the I Ching has made him a celebrated presenter in China, and his 4-volume work, A Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, is the fruit of his life's thoughtful cherishing of our relation to the earth. Dennis, thank you for accepting our invitation to share your valuable insights with us today, a Jungian perspective on the environmental crisis and what we can do about it. I give you Dr. Dennis Merritt.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for setting this conference up. I don't think it could come at a more timely manner, not only given what's happening in the Ukraine, but that's kind of an immediate situation to remind us that there's a lot more terrible days to come if we don't really start doing something really serious about climate change and environmental damage. And thank you, Tayria, for setting us up here perfectly with such a dream. And thank your dreamer for sharing that with us. And thank you to Mike Bezanson as well for his administrative efforts here and handling the Zoom and so on. I know in the Jungian world, all the technical stuff usually causes nightmares. I wanted to not have my phone ring during my presentation, so I thought, okay, I'll just pull the plug before I start. And what do you know, that meant the internet went down, so I was scurrying around to get that started up again. So here we are, and let me go to my screen share here. Now it said the host disabled screen share. So I'm waiting for the host to enable my screen sharing. It worked yesterday in practice. So is it Mike or Tom?
It's Mike, and
yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay. Boy, no sooner did I say about the technical difficulties with Jungians, and here we go. Well, I'll start. I think it's amazing that we have inside of us something that produces these amazing dreams every night. I think of it as dreams turn our daily experiences into a developing narrative. And the big dreams that Jung talked about turns our life stories into a myth. And those myths connect us with the collective. And if we work together with the dreams in a good way, it can connect us to the planet, to the broader environment. So once we get the images here, I had an image of the Roman Senate. Back during the Roman Empire, if somebody had a big dream, they were to report it to the Roman Senate so that the whole empire could learn from the collective consciousness, if you will, of our human species. And I like to think of it as the collective consciousness of our planet as well. So one of the archetypal motifs that Tayria presented was of being in the spiritual realm, but then coming down to the question about what's happening here on Earth. And I had a woman present a dream to me years ago that illustrates that archetypal motif. She dreamt that she was in a room lit with candles, and in the center of the room was a table with a book of life on it. And she looks into the book of life, and there is her name. And she just felt awed by that. Then somebody showed her the door, and it opened onto the back alley of an inner city at night. Another example of something coming down from the spirit realm to the difficulties on Earth is from that spiritual teacher Ram Dass that we all knew from the 60s. And Ram Dass said the more he can be in touch with the spirit realm, I think I have access here to my images, to my desktop. So let me do this. And there we go. So there's a painting from one of my famous favorite artists, Susan Boulay, did a lot of kind of spirit animal dreams, especially for women. She painted them. Here's the Roman Senate, the Book of Life, and whoops, getting a little ahead of myself there. Don't want to scare us too soon. So, and then Ram Dass said the more he's in touch with the spiritual realm, the more he can come down into the heart chakra and the pain of the world. So to me, that's the connection between those two areas. So we're talking about an experience from a dream or of one's faith that supported a Martin Luther King or a Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So Jung said, as Tanya reminded us, that the psyche of humankind is hanging by a thin thread. And thanks to this guy, that thread has gotten a lot thinner, and that's what we're experiencing at the moment. But what you think of what's happening, we would not be in quite such a desperate situation with people like Putin if we had started 30 years ago developing sustainable energy and alternative sources of energy, because we've imposed all of these sanctions on Putin, but we're still having to pay him for gas and oil because we're afraid it's going to cripple our economies. This would not be the situation had we started acting when scientists told us to that many years ago. So we're like in a situation, I think, like somebody was diagnosed with cancer about 30 years ago, and they really haven't done anything about it. And now they're at the point where it's just about to metastasize and get really bad. And Lester Brown, in his book, Plan B 2.0, that came out in 2006. And he advocated that we set up something like a Marshall Plan. Remember, that's what saved Europe after the devastation of World War II. And look what's about to happen now, hopefully not. But have we done anything about it? No. 16 years later, we have not taken anything close to a Marshall Plan to dealing with climate change. And we are getting dangerously close to what could be many tipping points. Now, a tipping point is when a situation gets so bad that it'll crash and then catastrophic things happen after that, and you may not be able to repair it. So this major new report that Tayria referred to came out just last Monday. It was from the International Panel on Climate Change. And this was a body of experts that was convened by the United Nations. And I see one of the people in the audience today has gone to all of those international climate change meetings, George Stone. And this report is the most detailed look that we have on the dangers posed by the global warming. And it said that things are happening so rapidly that it could soon overwhelm our ability and nature's ability to adapt unless greenhouse gases are quickly reduced. Now, this report concludes that nations aren't doing nearly enough to confront the hazards that have happened so far, let alone what is going to be happening in the future. And the perils are visible across the whole planet. In 2019, storms, floods, and other extreme weather events displaced more than 13 million people in Asia and in Africa. And the rising heat and drought are killing crops and forests and putting millions of people worldwide at the risk of hunger and malnutrition. And as an entomologist, I've long been concerned by the fact that vector-bearing mosquitoes are moving into new areas, and they're carrying diseases like malaria and dengue now appearing in Florida. And roughly half of the world's population is currently facing water scarcity at least part of the year. Now, these impacts are widespread and are much more negative than what experts expected. And that's what freaks me out. The experts are always amazed by how rapidly climate change is occurring. Now, many leaders have vowed to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. But that threshold is beyond that threshold is what scientists say could be catastrophic, irreversible damage, in other words, tipping points. But achieving that goal would require all nations to eliminate carbon emissions by 2050. And most nations are already far off track of what they promised to do. The world is currently on pace to increase between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And the risks to humans and environment accelerate with each fraction of increase in the global warming. And it is now likely that within the next few decades, we are going to reach that 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. Now, roughly at that point, roughly 8% of the world's farmland could be unsuitable for growing food. Coral reefs will decline by 70 to 90%. And without new protections, the number of people around the world exposed to severe coastal flooding could be increased by more than 1/5. That's if the temperatures increase by 1.5 degrees. And like I said, we're on track for it to increase between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Now, one of the experts says that climate change is the ultimate injustice. Between 2010 and 2020, droughts, floods, and storms killed 15 times as many people in highly vulnerable countries, including Asia and Africa, when you compare that to the wealthiest countries. So in addition to climate change, one frightening example, and just one example of a potential turning point, is related to the degradation of the natural environment. Case in point, the Amazon rainforest. It could go from being the lungs of the world, providing the oxygen for us to breathe, to becoming a carbon dioxide emitter. Now, I could go on and make us all more depressed about the environmental crises, but I trust that I've given you enough to remind you of the scope and urgency of the times. As a Jungian analyst and eco-psychologist, I have been thinking and writing about these things since 1991. That's 31 years. And here are some of the most important things that I think can be done. So first and foremost, let's begin with the challenging and actually exciting thought that we must work for a paradigm shift. Carl Jung, way back in 1940, coined the terms New Age and Age of Aquarius for what he saw was a necessary paradigm shift for the West and for all countries affected by the West, which is pretty much the whole planet by now. And this means that all aspects of our culture, all of our systems, our political systems, economic, cultural systems have to be changed. Also our therapeutic, and I'm saying our spiritual systems too. So we humans have created the systems that are destroying the environment, and we can change them. But it's like changing the course of the Titanic. That is not easy. This is one of my favorite images from The Onion, a satirical magazine that started in Madison, Wisconsin. World's largest metaphor hits the iceberg. We've heard the Titanic metaphor used time and time again. Now, environmental problems are a human species problems. They're not just an American, Chinese, Indian, or Russian problems. And that means we have to all work together on this. Could this be what brings our species together? We must change our concept of ourselves. The biggest problem is that we humans do not consider ourselves to be part of the environment. We don't consider ourselves to be part of nature. And we have to have an expanded sense of ourselves for this to happen. Second, think ecologically about everything. Ecology is about the interrelatedness and interconnectedness of everything, how energy and matter moves through systems. You can't separate an animal. We can't just look at a grizzly bear in isolation. It's evolved to live in a particular ecosystem. And the great environmentalist, Aldo Leopold, way back in the 1920s, realized that if you affect one area of the environment, you affect everything. So they'd kill off the wolves that were preying upon the deer. The deer then ate up all the grass in the environment, and the deer starved to death. So Jungian analyst James Hillman said that the pathologies in the environment are making us aware that we are part of it. If we can mess up the environment so much that's going to make our lives miserable, we must be part of it. That's kind of a backward way of realizing that. And here's an artistic creation by a Senegalese photographer, Fabrice Montero, that I really like, a series of paintings called The Prophecy. You can look it up online. And I think the future of our species is kind of like that doll that that woman is holding in her fingertips. So it is easy for the haves to overlook the problems and the have-nots in our society and in other countries. They are the ones most suffering from climate change, as the intergovernmental report revealed. When you think of what the pandemic just showed us, who the essential workers are, they're the bus drivers, the cashiers, the garbage collectors. And Jung, the eco-psychologist Jesus, said, "Inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of one of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me." Hexagram 42 of this Chinese book of wisdom, the I Ching, that I dearly love, says that a sacrifice of the higher element that produces an increase in the lower is called an out and out increase. It indicates the spirit that alone has power to save the world. To rule truly is to serve in our society by addressing the problems of income inequality, sexism, political, social, and healthcare inequalities. But a major inequality that I'm particularly addressing in this anthropocentric or human-dominated area is the human inequality in the relationship with the environment and to all other species on the planet. This leads me to the third point, which is to realize how unique our species is. Every species of the approximately 11 million species on the planet, every species alters its environment to a certain extent. But we are the only species that can figure out the laws of nature and bend them totally to our effect. So this started about 10,000 years ago with agriculture, but it really got going big time with the Industrial Revolution, which was only about 200 years ago of our 300,000 years of existence as a species on this planet. And here is one of those giant earth moving machines. So a big part of the paradigm shift will be to consciously reorient ourselves and our systems so that we can reintegrate with nature and to live sustainably with each other, with the planet, and with all the other species on the planet. Humans have to consciously do this. Animals don't have to do it. The laws of nature take care of it, but humans have to be conscious of it. Fourth, we have to educate ourselves and redesign our educational systems to learn how we devolved to this present dysfunctional state of the relationship with the environment. Jung said, man is not born every day. He is born once in a specific historical setting with specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has a relationship with these things. To wipe out a connection to the past is a mutilation of the human being. Richard Tarnas has written one of the few books that gives us a comprehensive history of the West in his book, The Passion of the Western Mind. This is one of the books I would use in a K-12 system that I have thought up. A Native American professor from Michigan State said that there's not a genetic difference in how we are connected to the environment. It's how we educate our children. So there are many wonderful PBS programs on nature, and there are many research projects on how we can help children connect more deeply to nature. And I have written in my book, Jungian Ecopsychology. By the way, the subtitle of the Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe is Jung, Hermes, and Ecopsychology. I get the occasional invitation to join some agricultural co-op. So I always like to include the subtitle of my 4 volumes. So I have about 8 or 9 pages in there on how I think Jungian ecopsychology would look in a K-12 system. And then there's this book, Rethinking Nature, Challenging Disciplinary Boundaries, that has about 21 chapters that addresses various aspects of how academia can reorient itself to addressing environmental issues. Fifth, we have to fundamentally change our economic systems. So currently it is dominated by the international corporate model. So if you think of a corporation, it's the ultimate narcissist. It's always trying to expand and eliminate the competition. Humans are expendable, and the environment is a resource base and a waste dump. So if you personify that, which the Supreme Court did with the Citizens United decision giving corporations of the rights of a person, you would have what Carl Jung would call a modern day monster and dragon. And here's an image that's so ugly, I don't like to have it up on the screen very long for a monster. But this is what is ruling the planet. So it operates on the quarterly report to the shareholders of the corporations. No seventh generation consideration here. So this monster trumps environmental rules and regulations in the countries because that could interfere with free trade. By contrast, the radical thinkers in the green and sustainable economics movement are talking about putting the environment at the center of our economic systems. And they propose such things as a reduction of the work week by half, so workers will have more time to spend with their families, friends, and community building activities. They also propose wealth redistribution on a planetary level and reducing the human population numbers. Sixth, in 1959, 2 years before Jung died, he said, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. We need more understanding of human nature because the only real danger that exists is man himself, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We are the origin of all coming evil. That was in 1959. So I think eco-psychology begins with our relationship with the little people within. That's what Jung called the people in our dreams. So that inner relationship is a relationship with the dark aspects of our own nature, what Jung called the shadow, with the relationship with a member of the opposite sex, and with the relationship with people that make us uncomfortable and fearful. How we relate to those people within our dreams is how we relate to people in the outer world. Change the relationship with our people within, and we change the relationship with people without. We can take responsibility for what is living in the intimate realm of our own psyches. And it humbles us to look honestly at our deep, shadowy side within. We can become less inclined to ride our moral high horse if we realize what is within and not projected onto others. Seventh, develop a sense of compassion for yourself and for others. Having compassion for ourselves helps us to look within at those dark elements within and inside of us, and to be more honest with who we are, to be more honest about our own narrow-mindedness, meanness, greediness, and so on. Healthy self-love is also the base for loving others. And scientists, psychologists, and all religions agree that being loved and lovable and loving are the most important foundations for being truly human. In our highly polarized and dysfunctional society, greater psychological awareness, compassion, humility, and love are desperately needed. We can't tackle the big issues of climate change and environmental damage until we can stop seeing our opponents and other people as enemies. And there are programs that can help deal with this. braverangels.org has designed ways of getting people together of opposite viewpoints and to discuss things. Eighth, Jungians recognize that the spiritual dimension of being human is one of the most important. A sense of something bigger than ourselves, of other with a capital O, an I-thou relationship. Now for me, the perfect model for that, and I've been very fortunate to have about 30 years of experience with Native American spirituality, the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota. And to me, the model for this is the Native American Vision Quest. So when a boy reached adolescence, he was put out on a sacred site for 4 days and nights without food and water, praying for a vision. And he hoped to get a vision of his spirit animal or medicine animal. Now that spirit animal was to become the foundation of that boy's life. It was the inner sense of the divine or the sacred. And that medicine animal then was to be the lifelong guide for spiritual, psychological, emotional development. It helped the boy to become fully human in a unique way, to incorporate the sacred in a unique way. So that personal development of the divine within then led to a powerful tribe where all members appreciated all the clans for their unique strengths and abilities. And some of those spirit animals became like Sitting Bull, buffalo, hollow horn bear, and here is black elk, this powerful leader from the Teton Sioux. A wonderful book is called Black Elk Speaks, and if you haven't read it, treat yourself to it. Now, I didn't receive any spirit animals. I received 2 spirit animals in my dreams, but one of the most powerful ones, sacred dreams, was of a typical Wisconsin meadow or pasture scene. But it was very simple, but every atom had an inner light. So I treat this as kind of a foundation for myself. And I should mention that the dream world is what Hillman called our zoological cathedrals. And my life task has been to embody that dream. It's one of the reasons we returned to Wisconsin after I finished training in Zurich. One of the things that eco-psychology encourages people is to connect deeply to their land. And I like to use dreams to help people do that. So eco-psychology is basically about our attitudes, values, and perceptions affect our relationship to nature, and it also looks at ways of deepening our connection with nature. So what I do, there are a couple of places in Wisconsin in particular that I go to, and I tell myself when I'm there, this is what my soul looks like if it were the environment. And right here in Milwaukee County, Atwater Beach, I went to it this morning. I go to it just about every day to exercise. I always take my cell phone and I capture images. I'm going to do a little documentary on Atwater Beach as an example of sense of place here in Wisconsin. But you can do this anywhere using this concept. And when I look at the environment as if this were my soul, I look at every aspect of the environment very carefully. Every element is a sacred element of my soul, and it changes with the seasons and with the wind coming off the lake and all of that sort of thing. So the results of my years of studying this, I've put in my book, Land, Weather, Seasons, Insects, and Archetypal View. But the concept, like I said, can be applied everywhere. So 9th, remember that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So this survey came out last year, a University of Bath survey of 10,000 youth, ages 16 to 25, about climate change, and from 10 different countries. And look at these staggering statistics. 2/3 of the youth felt sad, afraid, and anxious about climate change. One half felt angry, helpless, and that the future would be frightening and humans were doomed. 4 out of 10 did not want to bring children into the world, and 2/3 felt that the government was lying to them about the effectiveness of the actions to combat climate change, leaving them feeling sad and afraid. So look into the eyes of Greta Thunberg and tell her what actions you are taking to deal with climate change and other environmental disasters. So a democracy depends on a well-informed electorate, being able to dialogue with each other. Beware of becoming trapped in information silos, eschew simplistic answers, support politicians who are ready to tackle the difficult issues. And maybe you could enter politics yourself. As someone who grew up on a dairy farm, I had to include a cartoon with real silos in them. So we can't all become a leader like Greta Thunberg, but each of us can find some action to take. There are endless ways we can do this. And it's up to everyone to find out what their interests, passions, abilities, and experiences are. Begin by thinking of recycling as your daily ritual, as part of humans on this planet to help to try to live sustainably. And it's your daily reminder of what we are all, that we are all in this together. Develop ways to connect more deeply with nature by gardening, hiking, camping, and so on. This is one of my favorite places to canoe. It's on the lower Wisconsin River, where you see some of the bluffs there in the background. Join environmental groups like 350.org and the Sierra Club and the Citizens United. Become aware of what your local watershed is. Buy locally and know what ecosystem you're living in. By the way, Citizens United, I was a member of that group for several years. It's a wonderful, well-organized organization. And basically they want to have citizens from every congressional district pushing for what many experts say is the best way to deal with the fossil fuel problem. Tax it at the source and then give the taxes, the fees from that to people. And then on the free market, they can buy the cheapest sustainable energy that is out there. Also, find ways to set up maybe groups like the Braver Angels to get together to discuss with each other from opposite viewpoints what we can do. So, in summary, it's time to act. Work towards manifesting a new paradigm by thinking in that big dimension. Learn how to think ecologically about yourself and about everything, beginning with your relationship with the people in your dreams. Realize how unique our species is in being able to totally manipulate nature towards our ends. Educate yourself and work toward designing a holistic, ecologically based educational system. Become more psychologically aware about your own psyche, especially your shadow. Cultivate a sense of compassion for yourself and others. Cultivate a sense of the sacred in nature. Consider the state of the environment that we will be handing over to the youth. Find out what your unique contribution is toward becoming a citizen of the planet. And develop your wholeness, get together with like-minded people, and bring about change by becoming politically active. The hour is late, the time is urgent. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for that excellent presentation, and it gives us a lot to think about. And as we think about it, you can get your questions to Mike about Dennis, anything Dennis has said, or Tayria, or any comments you care to make. And we'll take no more than 10-minute break, a little less than 10 minutes now, and come back after that. But I remind you, during your break, whatever else you need to do, you could enter heartful, soulful thoughts and prayers related to the people of Ukraine. We'll take a break now.
Okay. So let me start at the top of the list. Tayria from Adele Tyler. She comments, the dream said that, quote, everyone must do everything possible at this time, but we know that many people are not sharing in this concern for the planet. So how do we do enough if millions are not awake to this need and may not do anything? And I think, Tayria, this was in response to your dream specifically, but Dennis may want to comment on that as well after you comment on it first.
Right. I appreciate the question because I'm sure that's on all of our minds. And, you know, the metaphor that occurred to me when I was thinking about this was the network of the fungi under the earth that we don't even see, the invisible fungal network that actually feeds the entire planet. If it weren't for that, and it's a web of intelligence. And I just feel like when you're doing your practice in Nashville, and I'm doing mine in Asheville, and Dennis is doing his in Wisconsin, that network of our energy and our love and our concern is vitalizing. And that we're not as isolated as we think we are. And I really do believe actually that what the quantum physicists are saying, that everything we do goes out and affects the field of consciousness. So I think it's hard when there's millions of people who aren't knowing what to do or concerned about it. But the more we awaken ourselves and each other and connect through that invisible web of our networking, the energy connections that we make will hit the field of consciousness and have an effect. So that would be my response for the moment. I'm sure Dennis will have a thought on that too.
Yeah, I certainly do. It's really difficult, and it's actually quite depressing to be conscious about these things for so long. A couple things. One of my few hopes is in the internet. And quite frankly, like I said in my presentation, we all have to find something that we can do. And I am trying to focus my energies on the young people, because they're the people that are most concerned, as we saw from that survey from the University of Bath. So I'm giving a lot of my thought to what kind of programs could reach out to young people, and developing some things that could be practically freely available to talk about some of the eco-psychological dimensions that I have presented. I do a lot of my thinking based on what I thought I could have used growing up on that small dairy farm in the 1950s. And neither of my parents went to high school, and I had a real crisis and was very depressed in the 7th grade. And that's when I started my search. Didn't have any spiritual background. So I like to imagine what kinds of things, from what I know now, that could be helpful to provide me with some framework like Richard Tarnas talked about. So that's how I'm orienting my energy. That's I think it's quite depressing trying to change some people's minds about some of these things. And I do find some encouragement where even the weathermen in our local stations are talking about climate change. When they give these, these bad weather reports. It was only about 5 or 6 years ago, and George Stone was there at the forum here in our First Unitarian Madison, and one of the local weathermen said, no, we can't mention climate change because, that's could lose some sponsors there, but things are changing. They change very slowly. The only fear that I have, and I think many of us have, is that this Titanic may not change soon enough.
All right, thank you. The next specific question I have is from Pamela Marie. who says, Dennis, how do you feel about veganism? Do you believe it will benefit climate change, and how?
Well, it's pretty much a standard that we have to eat lower on the food chain. And I think most of us probably know that it's incredibly inefficient to get your nutrition as a human being from animals, because you got to feed vegetables and grasses and everything to animals, and then they have all their metabolisms and everything. My daughter was a vegan for a while, and it's difficult to do, but I think the best thing that we can all do is move down the food chain and try to be vegetarians. I personally, my wife is British, so we eat a lot of fish, but it does change. It does take some conscious effort when you're used to eating hamburgers and sausages growing up in Wisconsin to move down that chain.
Thanks, Dennis. There was some discussion in the chat forum that started with the question, what was the book about seeing your opponents, about not seeing your opponents as enemies? And then some discussion that was a movement, not a book, Braver Angels. Can you clarify that, please?
Yeah, that is one of several groups, organizations out there that are designed to get people together from opposing viewpoints. And one of the things they do is they just start off like friendly conversations and then find out basic things that we all have in common and want, like good schools for our kids and safe environments and so on, and then move into some more of the difficult issues. But braverangels.org is one of those groups. I was going to try to get the name of some other one that I found out through the Citizens Climate Lobby, but I didn't hear back from our local organizer soon enough. But if any of you know what some of those other groups are, maybe you could mention that.
I would also say that David Bohm, the physicist, developed a system, a method that he called the dialogue process. And I used to teach that at the college level. But it is a way of getting opposing points of view and all various points of view into conversation with one another, and really learning to listen and respect and hold together the tensions of the opposites, and how it is in our thoughts, you know, what we reject or allow, how to adjust our thinking. So anybody who wants to look at David Bohm on the subject of dialogue, he's got some books, but also you know, that subject would help with learning how to get people together in a very in an intelligent method for listening to one another and respecting each other.
And is that B-O-E-H-M?
No, it's B-O-H-M, David Bohm.
B-O-H-M.
He's known as the father of quantum physics. He's, and this was what he did at the end of his life that he felt was what the planet needed, was people to be able to talk to each other.
I think the first part of that question too is most important. Mention something about our shadows or something. And I think that psychology is one of the marvelous developments that we have. The Dalai Lama realized that that was a real Western contribution to our humankind's consciousness, the Western psychology, this wonderful study that we found about attachment theory and all those sort of things. The problem with psychology, though, is that it's kind of operating in a vacuum of human to human relationships and disregarding the environment. But I think one of the most important things we can do is, and it comes more easily through dreams, is to realize the darkness within each of us, what Jung called a shadow. And if we can realize what our own shadow is, and then the psychological premise is that we project our stuff we don't like about ourselves onto other people, and then we treat them harshly or try to cut them out and so on. So that's why I emphasize the becoming psychologically aware. And what I do, I forgot to add that Jung had a great emphasis on becoming more conscious. And what I'm saying is we also have to become much more conscious about how we are part of nature and what we're doing to nature. That has to be part of our modern psychological consciousness. And I'm working to get that incorporated into Jungian training programs, that concept.
Thank you. I just wanted to note a comment from Carmel Sutcliffe from Adelaide, Australia, who said, "Greetings, Dennis. I'm joining from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, Adelaide, South Australia. I was a little late connecting due to the time difference, but what I managed to catch was very inspiring and grounding, as your talks always are. Thank you warmly." Of course, this is from the Aboriginal people of Australia had this concept of the dream time. I don't know whether you want to comment on that at all.
Yes, I mean, first of all, again, imagine somebody listening to this. What time is it in Australia? I mean, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, one thing that I didn't realize until I was nearly done writing my Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe. It took me about 18 years, but you're raising a family, keeping a practice going and so on. But I didn't realize till I was nearly done just how totally ecological Jung's whole system is, and all these wonderful sayings that he gave us for guidelines. And one of them is, Jung said that the challenge he gave to every modern man and woman was to unite their conscious, cultured side with what he called the 2 million-year-old man within. I like to call it the indigenous one within, from my dear friend Fred Gustafson. And that we all have this kind of indigenous sacred sense about, or potential to have that sense about the environment, as all indigenous cultures have had. They've all seen the environment as sacred. And that's our potential, but we've evolved so far away from that we have to re-educate ourselves. Like that Native American professor said, it's not that we're genetically different, it's how we educate our children. So uniting our cultured side with the indigenous one within is a major challenge, very relevant to our current situation.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I would just comment on the Australian, the Aboriginal concept of the dream time, in the sense that their concept of that, or their sense of that, is that it's its own ontological dimension, that it's an actual dimension that we enter when we sleep, and that they even said they felt like the Western person was mad because they only dream when they're asleep, but they can enter that realm awake and asleep. And so they go into the dream thinking, the way that dreams think, and the archetypal and mythological sort of sensibilities of the dreaming they can do while awake. So that, their sense of the dream time is that it's its own realm and it's part of us. We're living and breathing it, but we're not as conscious of it when we're awake. So I just love that.
Yes, and one of the fascinating areas that I wish most people had the opportunity to experience is to have some experience around being around a shaman or some of these indigenous peoples that have that connection. And then you realize, and you can relate that to your deep dreams, that, are we not being dreamt by something much broader and deeper, not only connected to the planet, but to the collective in the universe? I don't want to sound too new agey here, But if you look at what Jung called synchronicity, where there's some connection between your psychic state and the environment. That's one reason I like to use the I Ching. You can put a random question to this book of wisdom and get a meaningful answer. Now, what kind of universe is that? But every culture had a sense of synchronicity, every indigenous culture. And one of our challenges, I think, is to, there's so much that our indigenous cultures here in America can teach us about a sacred connection to the land and what the land is at these deeper levels. So we're having to turn back to them to learn some sacred ways.
Yes.
Thank you, Dennis. I just wanted to read a couple of comments that have come in and allow you or Tayria to comment on them. Kate Green said, I'm reaching out to the elderly, forming elder circles to help us identify gifts we can share with the larger community. And then Adele Tyler noted that a wonderful book of Jung's writings about nature and modern life is The Earth Has a Soul. Any comments?
Right. Yeah, I scarfed up a lot of good quotes from Jung, from Sabini's book, I think is the name, The Earth Has a Soul. It's a wonderful book. And the elderly, right. One of my premises that I like to talk to Analysans about is that for our species is about 300,000 years old. And 290,000 of that, we were living as hunter-gatherers and close to nature. And the elderly in all of those tribal situations were honored for their wisdom. The fact that they had survived into an older age, of course, was much more of a challenge back then. But the elderly were honored, and now we stick them in these nursing homes and everything. So finding ways to get them involved. I saw something where, I don't know if it was real or if this was fake news on the internet, but I thought it was in Finland, where they got together a nursing home with a kindergarten community and childcare facility. So there are a lot of ways that we can change that. And it's just sad to go into some of these nursing facilities.
Tayria, any comments, follow up to that?
Yes, I just didn't know if we were running out of time. I'm starting to notice, now I'm 70, and I'm starting to notice what they refer to as ageism, that that we don't in our culture have the sort of deference that one gives to those who have lived here a lot longer. And it's curious and interesting. I see it in just the most subtle ways that I really appreciate how in indigenous world, and I know when I've been in Africa and some of the places, the elders are there held up in sort of an iconic way. And, maybe the younger people who are doing all the work and the thinking and the socializing, but the elders are there just emitting their wisdom and power and referred to in these beautiful ways. And I wish that we taught that we talked about it more. So I love that that we're bringing this up. So thank you so much for that comment.
Right, so those were the questions and comments that came in, and they just exactly fit the time that we had, and I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Tom.
Great.
And I'm going to turn it over to Tayria for her work with the last of the dreams.
Okay. So thank you all for that. That was invigorating. I appreciated that. And thank you, Dennis, for your thoughts. Okay, so the dreamer of the first dream that we had that was in the upper world, she had a second dream that she strongly feels is related to that one. And she had the dream just a few days after the first dream. So again, in January. And again, I'll read the full dream and then I'll make comments. She writes, I've had some significant dreams about my dear, kind brother who died approximately 14 years ago at age 60 of Agent Orange, having been deathly ill for at least a decade. His compassion was deeply crushed by the Vietnam War, where he served on the ground for 2 years as platoon sergeant. She says he took to calling Vietnamese people gooks to his grave. But dreams given to me and to my sister shortly after his death confirmed that he was reclaiming his compassion. So I am surprised to see my brother in my dream in soul crushing, heart-wrenching, emotional pain, sobbing in agony, uncontrollably. What I instantly know is that the men, women, and children he killed have come to him to tell him their stories. They are shoulder to shoulder, lined up in a long line, a ways in front of him. He is facing full on the reality of what he had done, and it is breaking his heart wide open. I sob with him, knowing the terror, but the horror is his alone. He is inconsolable. And I know that it is good. I know that is what is coming to culmination on earth and everywhere. I know it is happening in the spirit world too. Eyes open, heartbroken open and vulnerable, feeling it all, everyone, everything, facing what is. The barrier is the gate. And then the dreamer notes, I awaken to feel that I can do something in my own way, big or small, every day to contribute to the culmination that is happening right now. Maybe even tiny things might tip the balance toward kindness. For me, I feel that a part of that was the care of my own soul, being more brave and speaking out however I can. And a part of that is sharing my dream and not being afraid to be criticized, scrutinized, judged, or called bananas. End of dream. Certainly, if we take this dream as a message for the community about what will be required as we move through the change that is taking place, this dream offers a sobering account. Her very kind brother had to go to war and was crushed by it. He didn't invent the war. He didn't invent the military, but he had to pay an extraordinary, enormous price for his participation in it. Similarly, we did not invent the systems of thought, the economics, the ways of life, the manufacture of pollutants, the systemic consumerism and destructive habits that have put the Earth community in such grave circumstances. But we will have to pay an enormous price for our participation in it. This dream suggests that our individual actions that contribute to the destruction of life systems, the extinctions, the mistreatment of animals, so that we have our fill of affordable meat, will come to us for our reckoning. Like her brother in the dream, if we face boldly and baldly what we do, and if we listen to the stories that could be told of the lives that we take, we may suffer in agony inconsolably. But also like the dreamer, some part of us will know that this reckoning is good. Our hearts will be broken, but also broken open. This may be exactly what the Earth wants. This may lead to a new era of living from the heart. As many prophets, indigenous peoples, and visionaries say, the current massive change we are undergoing is meant to create. This brings to mind C.G. Jung's conversation with his indigenous friend, Mountain Lake. Describing his people's impression of the white man, Mountain Lake told Jung, they are always seeking something. What are they seeking? The whites are always want something. They are always uneasy and restless. We do not know what they want. We do not understand them. We think that they are all mad. When Jung asks why he thinks we are all mad, Mountain Lake replies, they say that they think with their head. Why, of course, says Jung. What do you think with? We think here, says Chief Mountain Lake, indicating his heart. It's interesting that in Jung's account, similar to what the brother in the dreams experiences, when Jung listens, when he listens to the stories of the many people that he had killed in war, after this conversation with Mountain Lake, Jung says that he fell into deep meditation. He saw image upon image of the cruelties wreaked by his forebears, the forced conversions of people, the pillaging, murdering bands of crusading armies, the peoples of the Pacific Islands decimated by firewater, syphilis, and scarlet fever carried on the clothes that the missionaries forced upon them. Jung did not report in this account written in his autobiography that he had to face his own complicity in these horrors, though he would likely have done so. This dream suggests that we might have to face our own personal responsibility, the terrible harm of our actions as well. I have had more than one night in recent months in which I wake up time after time with crushing insight into my complicity in the many difficulties that I have suffered in this life. Events that I have felt were thrust upon me by circumstances outside of myself. In these night visions, I have been shown my harmful thoughts, actions, words, and behaviors that up to now I have failed to realize. Suddenly, I could see it clearly. I had managed to stay unconscious of this for the most part until these recent nights, when some mysterious process seemed to be occurring almost alchemically, in which one scene after another of various life events was running like a movie in my consciousness. And I saw what I had been unable or unwilling to see before, of how much responsibility I bear for the hurtful, uncaring, unconscious words and behavior. And like our dreamer reports, as I woke up in the morning to record what I now must face plainly, as horrifying as it was to me, I feel clearly that this is good. Finally, I am seeing through a lens that is more honest, real, and true. My heart feels pierced through, but I would never want to go back to being unconscious of these things. It is all a gift. This all coming together in the dream time, in the same period, her dream and my dream in the same month, January of this year, suggests to me that something collectively must be happening in the dream time. I will say that I have heard very similar accounts from others of my clients. To go back to the dream report, the dreamer says, I know that is what is coming to culmination on earth and everywhere. I know it is happening in the spirit world too. Eyes open, heart broken open and vulnerable, feeling it all, everyone, everything, facing what is. Facing what is. This statement reminds me of a very haunting dream that I heard years ago. which never leaves my mind. The dreamer has given me unconditional permission to share it. In it, the dreamer, a Canadian woman, sees a woman and a man walk toward the woods and go deep into the forest. Before long, she hears piercing, blood-curdling screams, loud and unrelenting. She says that she will never be able to get the terrible sound of these screams out of her head. And as she told the dream to me, I felt that I could hear them too. And since then, I can never get them out of my head either. She ran into the woods in the dream to find the woman being violently raped. And a voice gave her these words, the rape of Mother Earth. She saw the raped woman lying on the ground with her legs open, all bloodied and torn. The dreamer tried to get the rapist off of her. Her horror was profound, and she woke up. I read an article recently with the title, Astrobiologists Suggest that the Earth itself may be an intelligent entity. I do love to read about it when science is able to prove through its methods what the ancients and indigenous people have been telling us for millennia. In this case, that the Earth is a living being, evolving just as we are. I do not need to detail here the activities that humans have thrust upon our planet in the recent era that are truly nothing short of rape. This dreamer heard her screaming in pain and horror. And now I am aware of that scream and am haunted by it. If we all listen, we may hear it too. We know in human history that humans have been guilty of completely unfeeling tortures placed upon slaves, thinking of them as less than human, unfeeling genocides of men, women, and children, and our food industry's treatment of animals as if their suffering doesn't matter. This rape of Mother Earth dream amplifies that similarly, we are guilty of not realizing that Earth hurts by our actions. She experiences great pain. She is not dead, unfeeling, unconscious matter. She is a living, conscious planet. Even my grandson, age 6, knows this instinctively. No one has ever taught him this directly, but when I was reading him a book recently about the formation of the Earth, it talked about the Earth before there was life on the planet. He stabbed the page several times with his finger, saying, quite upset, "That's not true. The Earth is alive. The nature of a planet is that it is alive." He was very disturbed that the author would say that there was ever a time when there was no life on the Earth. The Earth is alive. He kept repeating it. I was truly impressed. Out of the mouth of babes. I circle back to the crushing experience of the brother in our dreamer's report, who sees with great horror what he has done to men, women, and children who he has killed. The dreamer finds her brother in soul-crushing, heart-wrenching, emotional pain, sobbing in agony uncontrollably. We now, receiving the message of the dreaming, may realize that experiencing such pain is likely to be our fate as we confront the harm that we have been complicit in our own private lives, toward the planet, toward the living systems on the planet, and the harm to our unborn children, the next generations. Allowing ourselves to feel the pain is sure to be an important step in turning the tide in a healing direction. Quoting the dream again, eyes open, heart broken open and vulnerable, feeling it all, everyone, everything, facing what is. The dream ends with the dreamer hearing the words spoken to her by spirit. The barrier is the gate. This statement has profound meaning to her, as they were spoken to her by a Zen master during an excruciating time in her life. This was all the master said to her, and she got it. She knew what to do. She explains, I went home to my little altar and my meditation cushion and sat with my obstacle. I looked it square in the face and went right in. I opened to it. It was horrid. It was terrible. It was so hard. I braved the storm and experienced the horror that it is. I learned about it deeply, and the understanding of it didn't really get me out of it, but it eased the fear and opened my heart, and I found inroads that I couldn't see through the fog of fear. The anguish that she had been suffering was a barrier. She faced it straight on, and it became a gate. She reflected that in her dream, the men, women, and children her brother had killed in war formed a barrier in front of him. They were all lined up, later explaining it to me that it looked like they were in this peachy mist. He faced them. I find it so moving that they didn't come to hurt him or exact revenge. They came to tell their stories, and he heard them, and it broke his heart open. This second dream, the dreamer says, came in response to the mandate given in the first dream that we heard. Again, to repeat, this is what is meant to be. The time is now. Everything is coming to culmination right now. It's imperative that everyone do everything they can. Now is not the time to sit back and expect it to all come into alignment. Everyone must participate in order to shift the balance. This dream calls us to profound inner work, I feel. What can we do? Face the obstacles and see them as portals. Rather than feeling defeated after this very difficult dream, the dreamer awakens knowing that she can do something, however small, every day to turn the tide toward kindness. Courage and bravery to speak the truth, to say what we know, to do the simple things right under our noses to do will carry us forward. Everyone must participate in order to shift the balance. The time is now. Today, with a horrifying war having broken out on our planet, even since the first announcement of this event today, and nuclear threats being delivered by a world leader, the imperative may feel stronger every single day. It is not just time to sit back and wait to see if things settle down. We must each find what we can do. The world indeed hangs on a thin thread. Quantum physics is discovering that the words that we say have potential to go out and touch everything, even the stars. Absolutely everything we do affects the whole. We are not powerless. We are very powerful. What can we do? Think with the heart, as Mountain Lake says. Put your taproot down deep and love something with your whole body, as Sophie Strand suggests. And inventor, scientist, and philosopher R. Buckminster Fuller, near the end of his enormously prolific life and work, said these words: I think that if there is anything really unique that has inspired me to do what I do, to go all out, that is, there's no question about it, it always goes back to love. If there is anything that has moved me, it has always been love. It's not just attraction. There is something more mysterious going on there. There is nothing more mysterious to me. The most mysterious of all the synergies I know is the phenomenon of love. I find love to be very close to the phenomenon of gravity. He compared gravity to radiation, quote, gravity is embracing, it comes back on itself and closes back on itself to make unity. And radiation tries to go apart. Radiation casts shadows, and gravity does not. I would say that love, if it is real love, is omni-embracing. It makes no exceptions for anything. It doesn't have shadows. The barrier to love is the gate. We can do this. I ask blessings of love and peace and strength in vulnerability and joy to each of you. Let us find the joy hidden in the sorrows as we hold our hearts together through these challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you, Tayria, and thank you, Dennis, for these amazing presentations, and thank you to the dreamers who gave us these dreams that opened things up to a bigger sense of things than we ordinarily have. We're at our time boundary now, and so we must end, but we'll hope to follow up with you with a constant contact in a week or two. In the meantime, my hope is that that maybe we can learn from, at least metaphorically, from what's happening in Ukraine. The issue of force is much quicker than the kind of power that Lewinsky has inspired in the world. And the kind of paradigm shift that Dennis talked about, that Jung realized is necessary, is more of that moral force, and it's more related to strength than force. So maybe in some metaphorical way, the larger psyche is trying to communicate something to us. The people of Ukraine are up against an incredibly awful situation, and the average person would say, "Oh, I'm just one person. What can I do?" But instead, they said, "What can I do?" And it seems to me we've got to make that shift within ourselves. We've got to be able to make a move from resignation to resolve. And we have to begin to think, at least in one way, what is one thing, at least one thing that I can do that fits my gifts, my nature, my calling in life, my sense of mission and purpose. And I think if we mull on that a little bit, and I would love to have you respond to that question if you, in the next week or so, to Seeds for Jubilee at AOL.com, where you receive the notice of this. It would be really helpful, and I'll hope to include some of that maybe in the constant contact that we send out, and maybe even a copy of this this event, that a link to it that you all can share with other people. So at any rate, thank you, our presenters, wonderful soul sharing and heartfelt, and thank you, dreamers, and thank you all of you who have participated. It warms my heart that we know that we need to come together, that we have a mosaic tapestry that can make a difference. So peace and grace to you as we go.